The wind howled across the northern expanse of Westeros, with a voice older than men's recorded memory. It was a chorus of ice and bitter cold, a dirge that shook even the sturdiest pine trees, dotting the frozen shore. The wall loomed in the distance, a monolithic barrier of shimmering ice, or so it appeared to the many who knew it only by rumor and half-legend. It was said that Brandon the Builder raised it in the Age of Heroes to keep the terrors of the far north at bay. But those who dared to venture deeper into forgotten lore, who studied the relics of the Dawn Age and sought out the truths behind myths, whispered of something more. They claimed that what the first men believed was a fortress of ice might, in fact, be a prison of foreign magic. A magic that originated not in Westeros, nor in Essos, but in the hands of the greatest sorcerers who had ever walked the mortal plane, the architects of old Valyria. Legends of old Valyria typically involved dragons and blazing forges, told of the freehold's might, and the eventual doom that consumed it. Yet behind those tales existed an older, more forbidding story. Some heretical accounts spoke of Valyria's early experiments with powers not of this world, a pantheon of nightmarish beings whose realms existed beyond mortal comprehension. Daedra, they were called, entities older than all known gods of men, with dominion over aspects of chaos, domination, and forbidden knowledge. In time out of mind, the first Valyrian blood mages had reached out across the veil between worlds, forging pacts to harness unthinkable sorceries. And from those unholy bargains, so the darkest texts claimed, the seeds of Valyria's greatness and eventual downfall were sown. The nature of this interplay between Valyrian fire and Daedric might remain shrouded in secrecy. The cataclysmic doom that swallowed the freehold in flame and ash made certain that most knowledge perished along with the great families and their dragons. But as is often the case, scraps of truth survived in the remote corners of the known world, in crypts, in hidden libraries, and in the memories of a select few whose ancestors had fled Valyria shortly before its collapse. A handful of mages and scholars, scattered across Essos, had preserved bits of these heretical histories, hoping never to reveal them for fear of summoning destruction once more. Yet secrets of such magnitude cannot stay hidden forever. Over the centuries, rumors spread of a hidden line of Valyrian descent that maintained the blackest compendiums of Daedric lore. Whispers told of those who still prayed to strange princes named Molag Bal, Marines Dagon, and Hermaeus Mora. And behind every rumor's rumor, was a single unifying proposition: that the great ice wall in the north was not of this world's making, but an intrusion into mortal existence. A Daedric construct shaped by old Valyria to keep something locked away. In a forgotten alcove within the citadel at Old Town, a young acolyte named Corlys of the Honeywine found himself drawn into this tapestry of forbidden knowledge. By chance, or perhaps by fate, he stumbled upon a half-rotted scroll that smelled faintly of sulfur. This scroll had somehow escaped the censors of the archmaesters for centuries, buried under mundane treatises on field irrigation and a bestiary of the Wendwater region. Its script was written in a melding of High Valyrian and something else, twisting runes that defied his attempts at translation. Yet certain passages were clear enough to ignite his curiosity. And the barrier stands, unmelting, for it is no natural ice but the crystallized essence of a prince's domain. The Watchers believe it was built by mortal hands, but in truth, it was shaped by those who bargained with the void. The chill that emanates from its surface is not the chill of winter, but the cold of an alien realm. Shaken, Corlys read on, glancing nervously around the otherwise deserted library. It spoke of old Valyria in its infancy, the blood mages who had harnessed dragonflame yet hungered for more. They reached out to Daedric princes, forging pacts to anchor their ascendants. In exchange for scraps of power, they agreed to construct a barrier in the distant north of a land they had not yet claimed. At the heart of this barrier was something that had the potential to shatter mortal existence if left unchecked. The scroll ended abruptly with the words, "Beware the Warden of Cold Harbor's mark upon the ice, for when his brand is awakened, the barrier will fail." Corlys felt a chill crawl along his spine, as though the entire citadel had turned to ice around him. He quickly folded the scroll, tucked it into his cloak, and fled the library. For days he wrestled with whether to bring it to the attention of an archmaester. Conventional knowledge insisted that the wall was Brandon the Builder's achievement, a marvel of the Age of Heroes. But if what he had read was true, the widely accepted story might be only half of a deeper, darker tapestry. In the end, he confided in no one. He left Old Town in secret, forging a new identity as a traveling scholar. His path took him northward, always northward, guided by the question, what if? What if the wall, that monstrous rampart of ice, was indeed shaped by a power beyond mortal ken? What if the dread mythologies of Daedra, long dismissed as foreign superstition from far-off lands, held a kernel of truth that would upend everything Westeros believed? He arrived in King's Landing under the guise of a wandering maester for hire. There, he found the city abuzz with the usual intrigues and petty conspiracies of the great houses. Far from the concerns of the far north, the lords and ladies of the Red Keep squabbled over trade routes and marital alliances, while the small folk simply prayed they would not starve or be crushed underfoot by the ambitions of the powerful. Corlys' heart sank. He needed to speak with someone who held real authority, but who in King's Landing would believe his extraordinary tale. By fortune, he made the acquaintance of an aged lord who had once served on the small council. This lord, Sir John Hollard, stripped of lands and title after a nasty scuffle of succession, had a reputation for dabbling in arcane theories. On a stormy night within Sir John's modest manse by the Blackwater, Corlys unveiled the scroll. The old lord listened with trembling eyes. When he was finished reading, Sir John lapsed into a silence that stretched painfully long. At last he whispered of his own father's claim that the Targaryen bloodline, descending from Valyria, inherited not only dragons but also hidden knowledge of forbidden arts. Indeed, some Targaryen kings had displayed alarming tendencies toward pyromancy and prophecy, though they cloaked it in the mystique of dragon dreams. And what if, Sir John asked, these dragon dreams were not gifts from some benevolent deity, but echoes of pacts made with Daedric princes long ago? What if, in the forging of that first empire of dragons, old Valyria had actually sealed a gate to an otherworldly prison, a gate which over time men mistook simply for a massive wall? Corlys felt as though the floor had fallen away beneath him. They spoke until dawn, forging a plan. If there was truth to be uncovered, they would need to see the wall with their own eyes. Sir John had just enough money left to fund a modest expedition north. He insisted on coming along despite his frailty and advanced age. The next day, they hired a small retinue of guards, scribes, and porters, securing passage on a trading vessel that would take them to White Harbor. From there, they would cross the winter-swept roads toward Winterfell, and then make the final journey to the Wall. Their voyage north was uneventful, save for Corlys' growing sense of anticipation. During the long days at sea, he pored over every piece of writing he could find, snippets from ancient Valyrian texts that Sir John had accumulated over the years. Clad in a cabin cramped with ill-fitting cargo, the smell of salt and tar in the air, Corlys read of Daedric princes, with names that felt like curses on his tongue. Molagbal, Lord of Domination, whose domain was said to be a realm of perpetual cold, enslaving the souls of the damned. Merinys Dagon, Prince of Destruction, sworn enemy to the very structure of mortal worlds. Shoggorath, Prince of Madness, whose laughter echoed from beyond the veil of reason. And Hermaeus Mora, the keeper of forbidden knowledge, who hoarded secrets that could unravel mortal minds. The more he read, the more Corlys felt a creeping certainty. One of these princes, perhaps several, had their mark upon the wall. If it were truly Daedric in origin, it would not be simple ice, but a layered matrix of what the Valyrian text referred to as crystallized realm stuff, something gleaned from the Daedra's own plains. When their ship finally docked at White Harbor, the north's chill struck them at once. Even though it was not the heart of winter, the air felt thinner, the winds sharper. Sir John coughed painfully. Corlys pressed a cloth to his mouth, worried for the old man's health, but Sir John waved him off, determined to press on. They rested for 2 nights, purchasing horses and provisions, while Sir John used what remained of his reputation to secure an audience with the Manderless, the ruling lords of White Harbor. Lord Wyman Manderley indulged them politely, but seemed unconvinced by their mission. He found the notion that the wall might be a Daedric artifact, an amusing fancy at best, or perhaps an elaborate shape. Still, he granted them leave to travel onward, offering a token escort to see them safely past bandits and wolves. Thus began the long ride through the north. While the cold became more severe, Corlys noticed another presence, and an undercurrent of something intangible, as though the land itself held its breath. They passed through small villages where the folk had never seen the Red Keep or the great cities of the south. Old men sat by hearths, carving bits of wood, telling children the legends of the long night. They'd speak of the Night's King, White Walkers, and other half-believed myths. But no one mentioned Daedra or anything resembling the princes Corlys had discovered in his texts. As they continued, some nights Corlys would wake in a sweat, convinced heard a voice in his dreams. It called from beyond the stars, the syllables elusive but seductively potent. A woman's voice? Or 1,000 voices layered together? He would shake himself awake, telling no one. Sir John, for his part, grew weaker each day, yet the fire in his eyes burned fierce. Often, Sir John would mutter about Valyria, about how the Targaryens who fled had carried with them not only dragons, but certain tomes that should have been destroyed. Corlys, by candlelight, would try to coax more out of the old man, but Sir John seemed to teeter on the edge of delirium. When Winterfell's ancient walls finally rose on the horizon, their company felt something akin to relief. Despite the gloom and cold, Winterfell stood as a bastion of warmth. The hot springs that coursed beneath its halls kept the stone fortress livable, steam rising from the vents in the courtyards. The Stark in residence, Lord Roderick Stark at that time, received them with courtesy, if not enthusiasm. He was a pragmatic man of few words, but he recognized the gravity of any mission that brought scholars to investigate the wall. Though he privately thought them half mad, he offered them a place to rest. Over supper, he inquired as to their intentions, arching a brow when Sir John, in between labored breaths, mentioned Daedric energies and Valyrian conjurations. Lord Roderick was polite enough not to mock them outright, but Corlys could see the flicker of amusement in his eyes. Nevertheless, the next morning, Lord Roderick provided fresh supplies and a pair of guides who knew the treacherous routes north. The land from Winterfell to Castle Black was wide and lonely, with few inns. They passed increasingly barren landscapes under a perpetually gray sky. At last, after a fortnight of travel, they crested a ridge, and there it stood in all its impossible enormity. The wall. Corlys had seen sketches. He had read of its height, but nothing prepared him for the raw scope. Looming 700 feet into the air, it stretched for leagues in either direction, a pale blue expanse that glistened under a weak sun. Ramps and steps led up to its top at Castle Black, and the fortress itself huddled at its base, dwarfed like a child, overshadowed by a giant. Even at a distance, the wind atop the wall howled like a living thing, threads of ice swirling in the sky. They arrived at Castle Black to find the Night's Watch in a modest state of readiness. The Black brothers watched their approach with curiosity and caution. Their Lord Commander was a seasoned man called Lord Commander Hardy, stiff-backed and suspicious of strangers. At first, the Lord Commander refused to allow them near the wall, citing that the Night's Watch was overburdened with wildling raids and lacking manpower. However, Sir John presented letters of safe conduct from House Stark and House Manderley, along with a sizable donation of coin, which softened Hardy's stance. He grudgingly allowed them to remain at Castle Black for a handful of days, so long as they did not disrupt the Watch's daily routines. At last, Corlys found himself standing at the base of the wall. He peered up at the solid face of ice, tinged with turquoise in some places, murky in others. Even a cursory glance told him something was off. Conventional wisdom said the wall was comprised entirely of frozen water and packed snow, reinforced by thousands of years of maintenance. But when he pressed his palm against it, expecting the near-fatal cold one would feel from touching solid ice, he found it oddly tolerable. Yes, it was cold, intensely so. But there was another layer to the sensation, as though the ice were merely a shell around something more. It reminded him of what he had read in the scroll. A prison, a lock that bridged mortal and Daedric realms. He spent entire days combing the base of the wall, taking notes, sketching runes whenever he found strange markings. The watchman regarded him with a mixture of pity and annoyance, especially after he began rummaging near the old fortifications. Some nights he ventured out by torchlight to examine stretches of the wall less patrolled, searching for any sign that might confirm the scroll's claims. It was on one such night that he stumbled upon the first real clue. Beyond a collapsed structure that might once have been a watchpost, hidden behind snowdrifts, Corlys discovered a vertical patch of ice inscribed with faint glyphs. At first he assumed they were just cracks, but as his torchlight flickered, he saw the glyphs swirl with faint luminescence. Stylized lines that resembled Daedric's script from his research. His heart pounded so loudly he feared it would echo across the yard. Carefully, he ran his gloved fingers over the symbols. The ice, unbelievably, seemed to pulse at his touch, as though acknowledging him. He could sense power thrumming beneath its surface, a slow, methodical heartbeat. Something was contained here, an entity or a binding spell of monstrous scale. He rushed back to Castle Black, breath fogging in the frigid air, to find Sir John. But the old man's condition had worsened, and he lay in a small chamber, blanketed by furs, his breathing shallow. Corlys knelt beside him, explaining in hushed, excited tones that he'd found physical proof of Daedric inscriptions. Sir John's eyes flickered open, and he managed a weak smile. "Then it's as the scroll said," he breathed. "We must delve deeper, my boy. The truth is locked in that ice. But be warned, if you break that seal, you'll unleash powers you cannot hope to control." Corlys opened his mouth to reply, but before he could speak, Sir John's gaze drifted, and he exhaled a final rattling breath. Grief hammered at Corlys' chest, but the old man's warning also echoed in his ears. Was it truly safe to probe these mysteries? Sir John had believed that tampering with the seal might risk unleashing something akin to a Daedric incursion. And yet, what if the seal was weakening on its own, subject to time and the turning of seasons? The next day, Corlys summoned enough courage to approach Lord Commander Hardy, urging him to send more rangers to inspect the wall's base for strange markings. Unsurprisingly, the Lord Commander scoffed, his patience worn thin by wildling raids. He insisted the watch had no time to chase after shadowy illusions. But Corlys's unwavering passion, his burning conviction, must have made some impression. Hardy grudgingly allowed a pair of watchmen to accompany the scholar, if only to prove that nothing was amiss. Led by Corlys, the small party reached the site. The watchman, one a veteran named Stone, the other a fresh recruit called Yoren, watched skeptically as Corlys held up his torch and brushed away the snow. Before long, however, even their dismissive expressions melted into uncertainty. The glyphs, faint as they were undeniably there. Stone swore under his breath, shaking his head. He had walked this stretch of the wall many times and never noticed such markings. Yoren asked if it was some sort of sabotage by wildlings, a cunning trick etched into the ice. But Corlys shook his head, too stunned to form a proper explanation. These glyphs felt ancient, older than the watch, older than the 7 kingdoms. That night, as Corlys tried to sleep, the dream returned. That voice, feminine yet layered with 1,000 echoes, called to him from across a cosmic gulf. Though he couldn't recall the exact words upon waking, he felt a sense of urgency, as though something slumbered behind the wall. If it was a Daedric entity or an artifact, it might be stirring in response to his presence, his prying. Another possibility crept into his mind. The White Walkers were rumored to be stirring in the far north once more. Could their resurgence be tied to the weakening of this Daedric barrier? Unable to contain his curiosity, Corlys resolved to attempt a ritual of detection using what scraps of Valyrian and Daedric lore had gleaned from Sir John's texts. The spells were incomplete, half intelligible, but he had to try. Under a moonless sky, he set up candles and sigils in a disused courtyard near the wall, the wind threatening to blow out his lights at every turn. He chanted in High Valyrian, weaving in the Daedric syllables that felt like broken shards in his throat. The cold intensified around him, as though the night itself leaned in to listen. At first, nothing. Then, a subtle shimmer in the air. Corlys felt a pull, like someone tugged on his spirit from beyond. The ice of the wall glowed faintly, as if a network of veins lit up beneath its surface. He glimpsed images in rapid succession, a sprawling city of black stone towers, wreathed in shadow and flame. Old Valyria, perhaps before the doom. Then a swirling vortex, alive with monstrous shapes. A figure clad in obsidian armor, wreathed in blue flame, loomed in the vision's periphery. The figure raised a crooked staff, and from its tip erupted chains of ice that stretched across a void. An echoing laugh, dripping with malice, reverberated through the night. And then it was over. Corlys collapsed, gasping, the candles extinguished by a sudden gust. The next day, he felt as though he had run a marathon. His body ached, and a bruise-like mark ran across his chest where some force had struck him. As dangerous as that ritual had been, it confirmed his worst suspicions. There was indeed a Daedric presence bound within or behind the wall. The real question was, why? Why had the Valyrians gone to such lengths to seal this presence in the far north of Westeros? Why not create such a barrier in Valyria itself, or some other region? Bit by bit, the puzzle came together. The ancient blood mages must have foreseen a threat even more dire than the White Walkers. An entity or power that, if it escaped, would threaten not merely the Seven Kingdoms, but the entire mortal plane. Perhaps it was a fragment of a Daedric prince's essence itself, forcibly bound away. Or maybe it was a gateway, a direct link to a Daedric realm, concealed beneath layers of ice to keep it from opening fully. Corlys tried to communicate his findings to the Night's Watch officers, but they regarded him with suspicion. Their discipline did not leave room for wild claims of Daedric involvement. One or two, including the pragmatic maester at Castle Black, listened politely, but made no commitment. Only Stone, the veteran watchman who had witnessed the glyphs firsthand, seemed genuinely unnerved. He confided to Corlys that he had seen strange lights on the other side of the wall during his late watches. He had been telling himself it was simply the aurora or tricks of starlight, but now he wasn't so sure. A week later, news arrived that wildlings were gathering in force beyond the wall. Rumors suggested they were fleeing something, some terror that stirred in the frozen wastes. Their chieftain was said to be rallying his people, not simply to raid the south but to escape a greater evil. The timing was too coincidental for Corlys to dismiss. If something was stirring behind the wall that even the wildlings feared, it might be related to that Daedric presence. Lord Commander Hardy decided to lead a ranging party beyond the wall to investigate. Desperate to learn more, Corlys pleaded to join, but the Lord Commander flatly refused. He had no interest in losing a bookish Southron to the bitter horrors of the true North. Despite the refusal, Corlys was determined. With Stone's discreet help, he managed to slip out of Castle Black the night before the ranging set forth, making sure to follow them from a safe distance. The journey into the haunted forest was a trial of cold, darkness, and fear. Corlys struggled to keep pace without being noticed. He lagged behind, careful to cover his tracks. Once or twice, he thought he saw shapes moving among the trees, pale figures that vanished when he blinked. His mind churned with half-imagined horrors. Did White Walkers really roam these woods? Or was there something even worse at large, freed or awakened by the weakening of the Daedric barrier? After 2 days, the Lord Commander's party reached a clearing beneath the looming presence of the wall's far side. Corlys hid in the undergrowth, watching from a distance. The men spread out, searching for signs of wildling camps. The wind moaned, carrying flakes of snow. Then, from the tree line, a ragged band of wildlings appeared, brandishing crude weapons. The Night's Watch formed ranks. For a moment it seemed there might be a desperate skirmish. Suddenly, the wildling leader, a scarred woman with stringy red hair, stepped forward, unarmed. She shouted that they wanted no fight. They only wished to pass. She spoke of a blue-eyed demon haunting the deeper forest, and that some of their people had vanished without a trace. The Lord Commander demanded specifics, but the wildlings had only legends, A sorcerer clad in black ice, or an unseen force that claimed victims by the pale moon. They insisted they had seen things that no living man should see. Shadows that tore souls from bodies, leaving husks behind. Corlys' blood ran cold. He remembered the glimpses in his ritual of a figure in obsidian armor. Was it possible that a Daedric creature had begun to manifest? Even as his thoughts swirled in panic, the clearing exploded into chaos. A piercing shriek cut the air, followed by a swirl of snow so violent that men and wildlings alike stumbled. Corlys shielded his face as an icy gale whipped branches into a frenzy. When he looked up, he saw a figure standing atop a low rise, partially obscured by the blizzard. It was tall, impossibly tall, and its eyes glowed an electric blue. The Lord Commander shouted for his men to stand fast. The figure raised an armored hand, and from the swirling snow erupted spidery tendrils of ice, lancing across the clearing. One watchman was impaled before he could cry out. Another was seized and dragged into the shadows. Wildlings scrambled, terror etched on their faces. Arrows were loosed, swords brandished, but the wind and snow twisted everything astray. Corlys, trembling with dread, realized that this was no ordinary White Walker. The aura emanating from the figure was different, a terrifying aura that reminded him of the Daedric presence he'd sensed at the wall. Each time the watchmen or wildlings approached it, they recoiled as though hitting an invisible barrier. Even from where he crouched, Corlys felt waves of cold hammering his senses. He could scarcely breathe. Stone's voice rang out somewhere, a desperate attempt to rally the men, but the figure moved with inhuman grace. With a sweep of its hand, it unleashed a piercing wail that tore through the night. Corlys felt something akin to a blow to the chest, and he doubled over in pain. When he dared to look again, the figure was advancing on the Lord Commander, who swung his sword bravely but uselessly. The black ice armor seemed impervious to steel. The being seized Hardy by the throat, lifting him effortlessly. As the commander choked, the figure's glowing eyes flared. Corlys watched in horror as a faint mist poured from Hardy's mouth, siphoned away into the figure's hand. It was as though his very spirit were being devoured. With a final convulsive shudder, Hardy went limp. The figure cast aside his body, letting it crumple to the snow. The watchmen and wildlings broke, scattering in all directions. Corlys fought his own instinct to flee, but something rooted him in place. He clutched the pouch of Valyrian texts at his side, remembering the half-finished ritual he had performed. If this was indeed a Daedric manifestation, would the same or a similar invocation banish it? He forced himself to rise, still hidden from view by the swirl of snow and darkness. His breath came in ragged bursts. He began to chant, softly at first, stumbling over the Daedric syllables. The wind cut at his face like knives. A savage, otherworldly shriek echoed over the clearing. Was the figure sensing him? Or had it already set its sights on the scattering survivors? Corlys closed his eyes, summoning every ounce of will. He visualized the glyphs he had seen on the wall, recalling the lines that glowed with that eerie luminescence. He tried to overlay them in his mind, forming the shape of a binding circle. Then he spat out a final phrase he had read in the scroll, a line that called upon the wards of Cold Harbor. Molag Bal's domain. A horrifying risk, for to invoke that prince's name might just as easily invite ruin. But desperate times demanded desperate measures. At once, the wind died. The swirl of snow froze in midair, time seeming to halt for a heartbeat. Then, the figure's head snapped toward Corlys' location, its eyes flaring with a fury so intense that Corlys nearly fainted on the spot. But something else was happening too. A faint shimmer, like the reflection on water, pulsed around the figure as though an invisible barrier had begun to tighten. The figure unleashed a roar, metallic and guttural, and lashed out with an icy lance. It shattered against an unseen ward, just feet from Corlys. Sparks of blue energy danced, crackling with arcane force. Corlys pressed on, chanting the words of the binding. Each syllable felt like a spike driven into his brain, the cost of channeling forces beyond mortal capacity. His vision blurred, and he tasted copper as blood trickled from his nose. The entity struggled, its limbs contorting at unnatural angles. It lunged, but the ward tightened, flickering like a net of shimmering runes. With a final burst of hateful shrieking, it dissolved into a whirlwind of frost that scattered across the clearing. In the aftermath, there was only silence, punctuated by the groans of the wounded. Corlys, on his knees, felt numb. He had succeeded, for the moment. But he knew enough about Daedric lore to realize that banishing such a manifestation did not destroy the creature permanently. Unless the wall's ancient wards were strengthened or renewed, it would return. The survivors gathered warily, some nursing injuries, others trembling with the aftershock of near-certain doom. Many stared at Corlys, with a mix of confusion and fear, not understanding what had just happened. Some muttered that he was a sorcerer, others that he must be an agent of the gods. Stone approached, carrying the limp body of a watchman who had been skewered by a shard of ice. The watchman moaned, still clinging to life. Corlys felt guilt, though he knew he had done all he could. Stone simply placed a hand on Corlys' shoulder and nodded once. "Whatever you did," Stone whispered, voice hoarse, "you saved our skins. But the commander's dead, and that thing is still out there. We've got to get back to the wall." Corlys nodded, fighting tears. He cast one last glance at the place where the Daedric horror had stood. The snow had begun to drift again, filling in footprints and claw marks, as though the land itself wanted to forget. But Corlys could not forget. He knew now that behind the wall's facade of ice lay a complex tapestry of wards and pacts. The Valyrians had built it with the help of Daedric princes to confine something so potent that if unleashed, it would devour the living world. He led the survivors back toward Castle Black, a harrowing journey that took 2 days. They moved slowly, burdened by the wounded and the loss of their leader. They were forced to evade more wildlings, equally desperate and terrified. On the final night, Corlys looked up at the wall by starlight, seeing it in a different way. Not simply a wall of ice, but a monstrous artifact bridging mortal and Daedric realms. He could almost perceive the faint pattern of glyphs winding through its massive bulk, pulsing in time with an otherworldly heartbeat. Upon their return, word of their ordeal spread through the Night's Watch. The new acting commander, Sir Alistair Crane, was a pragmatic man, deeply unsettled by the events. Though he struggled to accept the notion of Daedric magic, the testimonies of Stone and the other survivors forced him to at least entertain the possibility that something beyond the usual terrors lurked in the far north. He convened a council of officers and listened grimly as Corlys recounted the confrontation with the armored figure. Sir Alistair asked the question that weighed heavily on everyone's mind. "If the wall is failing, how do we shore it up? We can't just heap on more ice. If this is dark sorcery, we need a sorcerer's remedy. Do you know how to strengthen those wards, scholar?" Corlys faltered. The scroll had mentioned an incantation that could rejuvenate the Daedric wards, but it required a conduit linked to old Valyria's blood rights. The only living blood of Valyria he could think of was the Targaryen line, but they were far away in King's Landing or on Dragonstone. Even if Corlys could find one of them, would they consent to a ritual involving Daedric entities? And what would be the cost of such a ritual? He admitted his uncertainty. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. They had no illusions about persuading a Targaryen to visit the wall for an arcane rite, especially in times of political tension. They mulled over alternative solutions. Perhaps the children of the forest had answers, or the red priests of airy lore, or the faceless men with their hidden knowledge. But each proposal seemed more far-fetched than the last. Time was a factor, Corlys insisted. If the Daedric presence had manifested once, it would do so again. Perhaps not immediately, but eventually. And with each manifestation, the barrier might weaken further, cracking open the door for a full-blown incursion. Sir Alistair rubbed his temples, visibly torn. In the end, he tasked Corlys with writing letters detailing the situation, addressed to King's Landing, Old Town, Winterfell, and any other seat of influence. Meanwhile, the Night's Watch would double their patrols and remain vigilant. It was a meager plan, but all they could manage under the circumstances. Corlys found himself cloistered in the dimly lit library at Castle Black, drafting urgent letters. He included sketches of the glyphs, transcriptions of the Daedric phrases, and warnings about the entity encountered beyond the wall. As he sealed each missive with wax, his hands shook. He could practically hear the dismissive scoffs they would elicit among the southern lords. Even so, he had to try. Over the following weeks, ravens were sent out. Few replies came. One from Winterfell, carrying Lord Roderick Stark's seal, expressed grave concern but offered little in the way of assistance. Another from Old Town was terse, from an archmaester who demanded that Corlys return the stolen scroll at once. No word came from the Iron Throne, and Corlys couldn't help suspecting that the letters had been intercepted or simply dismissed as ravings. During this tense waiting period, Corlys continued his studies of the wall. In the darkest hours of night, he roamed along its base, sometimes joined by stone or other watchmen who had grown curious. With each foray, he discovered more glyphs etched into the ice, each faintly pulsing when touched, as though they recognized his presence. He experimented with small spells of alignment, chanting bits of Old Valyrian, hoping to stabilize the wards. Sometimes he thought he felt a slight hum in response. Other times, nothing happened at all. But one night, as he was tracing a particularly elaborate series of runes, he experienced a sudden overwhelming vision. The ice under his fingertips glowed, and his surroundings vanished. He found himself standing on a narrow bridge made of swirling darkness, suspended in a void. Beyond the edges of the bridge, giant shapes coiled and twisted, shapes too immense and terrible to comprehend. At the far end of the bridge stood a gate of black iron, inscribed with the same glyphs found on the wall. Before the gate, a draconic silhouette shimmered, robed in flickering flame. It turned toward Corlys, revealing the face of a Valyrian mage, eyes white-hot, hair swirling in intangible wind. A voice, or perhaps many voices, spoke in unison. "We have bound the gate. We gave of our blood and our souls to seal the lords of the void. But our time has passed. Mortal wards crumble with mortal forgetfulness. Will you take up this burden?" Corlys tried to speak, but no sound emerged. Then, with a rush, the vision ended, leaving him shivering on his knees, frost clinging to his eyelashes. Zone was beside him, alarmed. Corlys stammered that he was fine. But inside, he wrestled with the gravity of what he had seen. The ancient Valyrian blood mages had clearly regarded this as their ultimate duty, an act that transcended mere empire building. They had sealed away something so vast that it threatened existence itself. In the days that followed, Corlys continued his attempts at smaller-scale rituals to reinforce the glyphs. He felt marginal improvement, but not enough to truly restore the barrier. Morale among the Night's Watch grew grim. No help had arrived, and more unsettling reports trickled in from beyond the wall. Disappearances, sightings of strange lights, the distant echo of unnatural shrieks at night. As winter's cold deepened, it became harder to distinguish reality from lurking dread. Then one bitter evening, a raven arrived bearing the sigil of House Targaryen. Sarah Lister summoned Corlys to the Lord Commander Solar. The letter was succinct and bore the personal seal of Prince Daedric Targaryen, who had evidently taken an interest in the rumors swirling about the wall. Prince Daedric wrote that he would travel north with a retinue of loyal soldiers and maesters, intent on seeing these so-called Daedric glyphs himself. He gave no exact timeline, but warned that if Corlys was found to be spreading falsehoods, the consequences would be severe. Corlys felt a complicated whirl of emotions, relief that a member of the Targaryen line might actually come to help, fear of what would happen if the prince dismissed his findings, and a sense of deep foreboding. If the Targaryen presence could indeed reawaken or strengthen the old wards, perhaps they stood a chance. But the risk of meddling in such powerful forces remained formidable. One misstep could open the gate fully, unleashing a Daedric presence beyond mortal reckoning. A month crept by. The nights grew longer, the cold more savage. Then at last word came that Prince Daeron's party had crossed the neck and was making haste to Castle Black. The Night's Watch braced itself, preparing as best it could for a royal visit. Some brothers muttered that the prince would be a southern fool who had no business in the harsh north. Others hoped he would bring much-needed supplies and reinforcements. Corlys tried not to let anxiety consume him. but he felt the weight of the walls, secret, pressing down like a silent avalanche. When Prince Daedric arrived, Corlys was surprised by the man's youth. Barely older than 20, Daedric had striking silver-gold hair and violet eyes, a testament to his Valyrian lineage. Yet beneath his fine cloak, he wore practical leathers and furs, a sign that he had some measure of respect for the northern climate. His demeanor was polite but guarded as he greeted Sir Alistair and the officers. Then he turned his gaze on Corlys, regarding him like a puzzle to be solved. "You are the one who claims the wall is held by Daedric wards, yes?" he asked, voice measured. "Show me." Corlys led him to the same glyphs he had shown Stone, guiding the prince through icy corridors at the wall's base. By torchlight, Daedric studied the ruins with surprisingly little shock or skepticism. He traced them with a gloved hand, uttering a single word in High Valyrian. The glyphs glowed faintly, responding to his touch just as they had Corlys. The prince nodded, exchanging a look with an elderly maester who accompanied him. "You see," Corlys said softly, "these inscriptions are not typical Valyrian script. They're Daedric in origin, bound centuries past. The scroll I found suggests old Valyria's blood mages forged a pact with powers from beyond our world to seal away a monstrous threat here in the far north." Daeron's eyes flicked over Corlys. A monstrous threat indeed, one that might have ties to the White Walkers, or worse. "I do not doubt your sincerity, Corlys of the Honeywine, but I must see for myself how dire this truly is. My blood is of Valyria, as you say. Show me what can be done." "Miss Man." They returned to Castle Black, where Daedric and his advisors spent hours poring over the documents and notes Corlys had compiled. Under lamplight in the fortress's drafty library, they debated the nature of Daedric princes, whether they were truly gods or demigods, and if contact with them was the cause of Valyria's downfall. The prince's maester, a stooped man named Norrin, seemed both fascinated and aghast. He admitted that the Targaryen line carried fragments of knowledge from their ancestral homeland, though most had been locked away or lost during the conquest. Occasionally, the more eccentric Targaryen kings and princes had dabbled in blood magic and prophecy, but none so openly invoked Daedric powers, until now. In the end, Prince Daedric resolved that a grand ritual must be attempted, using his Valyrian heritage as a conduit. Corlys' heart pounded. This was the moment they had hoped for, but also the moment that might unleash unimaginable danger if mishandled. The ceremony would be performed at the wall itself, near the glyphs, in the hour before dawn when the energies of night and day were said to be in balance. Word spread among the Night's Watch that the royal party was conducting some manner of dark sorcery. Many whispered prayers to the Seven, or to the old gods. Some simply vowed to stay away. On the appointed morning, the air was so cold that breath turned to crystals, drifting to the ground like tiny diamonds. Torches sputtered, nearly extinguished by the icy wind. Prince Daedric stood in front of the glyphs with Corlys, Stone, Maester Norrin, and a few select guards. The rest waited at a distance. Daedric donned a silver circlet, set with a black stone, rumored to be a relic from ancient Valyria. He gripped a small dagger of dragonglass, the same material rumored to harm White Walkers, its blade glinting with a faint greenish hue. Corlys chanted first, reciting the partial incantation he had gleaned from the scroll. Daedric followed, his voice resonant and sure in High Valyrian. Maester Norrin sprinkled a powder along the ice, forming a circle around them. At each syllable, the glyphs responded, glowing brighter. A low hum filled the air, vibrating deep in their bones. Daedric then pricked his thumb with the dragonglass dagger, allowing a few drops of his Targaryen blood to fall onto the icy surface. Immediately, the glyphs flared, as though hungry for that offering. Corlys felt a surge of energy ripple outward, swirling around Daedric. The prince's eyes grew wide. He whispered something, half lost in the wind. Suddenly, the ice around them cracked, sending jagged lines across the ground. Pale blue light shot upwards from the runes, forming a pillar that reached high toward the top of the wall. The watchers at a distance gasped, some dropping to their knees. Within the pillar, shapes flickered, ghostly silhouettes of robed figures, reminiscent of the vision Corlys had experienced. He heard a voice echo across the courtyard. "The seal endures, the binding is upheld. Beware the great predator beyond the void. May the fire in the blood be our eternal watch." A moment later, the glow subsided, though the glyphs continued to shimmer faintly. Prince Daedric staggered, pressing a hand to his forehead. Stone caught him before he fell. Maester Norrin rushed to his side, checking for any sign of harm. A hush fell over everyone present. Then, slowly, the cracks in the ice sealed themselves, as though reversing the damage. The pale morning light crept across the horizon, illuminating the wall in soft pink hues. An otherworldly sense of calm descended, as if the realm had drawn a deep, stabilizing breath. Corlys closed his eyes and exhaled, relief flooding his veins. It felt as though the barrier had been renewed, at least for now. When Daedric recovered, he nodded to Corlys. "You have done Westeros a great service, though most will never know it. You risked your life, and your soul, to pursue this truth. The wall stands, not just because of Brandon the Builder's legacy, but because of the pacts forged by old Valyria with powers best left unnamed." His voice carried a measure of awe and a hint of reverence. Over the following days, the Night's Watch and the Targaryen retinue waited to see if there would be any new manifestations of the Daedric entity, or the White Walkers. Scouts reported quiet in the far north, save for the usual harsh conditions. The wildlings, now aware of the renewed strength of the wall, seemed to have retreated further or found safer routes. Some watchers at the top of the wall claimed they sensed a deeper cold than usual, but no monstrous figure materialized. In hushed conversations, Corlys and Daedric discussed the future. They agreed that the knowledge of the wall's true nature should remain a guarded secret, shared only with those who had the wisdom and capacity to defend against such cosmic threats. The Seven Kingdoms were fractured enough without spreading rumors of Daedric influences. Perhaps, Daedric suggested, the Targaryens themselves should keep watch on the wards, quietly renewing them each generation. Corlys expressed concern about the moral implications of continuing to use Daedric pacts. Daedric merely replied that ignorance was a greater danger, and that to protect the realm, sometimes one must bear burdens that others cannot. When Prince Daedric eventually departed Castle Black, he did so under the official pretense of having conducted a royal inspection. The men of the Night's Watch bid him farewell with muted respect. Corlys accompanied him south as far as Winterfell, where they were hosted once more by Lord Roderick Stark. In a private conversation, Daedric told Lord Stark the broad outlines, that there was more to the wall than meets the eye, and that future Starks should keep watch for signs of magical weakening. Roderick, though clearly uncomfortable, promised to do what he could. Corlys then parted ways with the prince, who continued on to King's Landing. The scholar felt a strange emptiness as he watched Daeron's procession vanish down the King's Road. He had accomplished something beyond measure, saving the realm from a threat only a handful of people even understood. Yet the knowledge weighed heavily on him. He decided to remain in the north, at least for a time, to continue studying the wall's glyphs and observe any subtle changes. Stone volunteered to assist, having seen enough strangeness to last a lifetime. On quiet evenings, Corlys wandered the base of the wall, feeling the renewed pulse of the wards. Sometimes he caught himself whispering thanks to the old Valyrian sorcerers who had forged this uncanny alliance. Other times, he shuddered at the thought of what might lie beyond, pressing its will against the wards in hopes of a breach. The Daedric princes were patient, immortal. Human vigilance, by contrast, was fleeting. Another generation, another age, and the realm might forget again. The cycle could repeat, bringing the world to the brink of cosmic horror once more. Yet for now, the north was quiet. The days passed. The haunted forest remained haunted, but it did not vomit forth legions of ice-wreathed nightmares. For now, at least, the watchers on the wall could hold their heads a little higher, though they did not fully understand why. Corlys took some solace in that. He stayed on, scribing new journals, sending out coded letters to those few he believed could be trusted. He hoped to prepare the next scholar or warrior who stumbled upon this truth, so they wouldn't have to piece it together haphazardly as he had done. In the end, the wall remained an immense glacial sentinel against the horrors of the far north. But Corlys alone, alongside a handful of watchers and one Valyrian-blooded prince, knew that its strength came not only from the ice that men saw, but from the Daedric power woven into it by old Valyria. That power cut both ways, protective yet perilous. As he studied the glyphs by torchlight, he would occasionally feel them thrum under his fingertips, as if aware of his presence, a living tapestry of runes bridging realms best kept apart. Though the realm at large slept peacefully in its ignorance, Corlys knew that the true north was a precarious tapestry of Daedric wards and mortal faith. And as long as that tapestry held, Westeros would endure another day under the shadow of the unknown. Some nights, standing atop the ramparts of Castle Black, he would gaze out at the vast, snowbound horizon. The wind keened, carrying faint whispers that might have been the howls of wolves, or the echoes of Daedric voices. He reflected on the question that had set him on this path. What if the wall was no simple barrier of ice, but an artifact woven from powers beyond mortal comprehension? He had learned the answer, and with it came the inescapable conclusion that the histories of Westeros were deeper and darker than anyone dared suspect. A quiet pride mingled with his dread, for he had played a part in preserving the fragile shield separating the known world from abominations beyond imagination. As dawn broke over the frosty sky, Corlys would close his eyes, feeling the sun's feeble warmth on his face. He murmured a silent prayer to whatever benevolent forces might be listening. For the moment, the wall, this Daedric bastion built by old Valyria, still stood strong. But secrets have a way of reshaping destinies, and he could only hope that the day never came when the realm discovered the true nature of the wall the hard way, in a cataclysm of ice, blood, and demonic fury. Until then, the great sentinel loomed, hiding its mysteries behind glittering frost, ever watchful on the edge of the world. And Corlys, carrying the weight of forbidden knowledge, found a curious sense of purpose in his vigil, sustained by the fragile hope that Westeros might never again glimpse the horror now bound in the wall's frozen heart. Corlys remained in the north. The enormity of what he had discovered, and the peril he had helped forestall, made it impossible for him to depart as though his task were finished. Every time he ascended the worn steps to the top of the wall, he felt that subtle vibration again, a deep rumble of power residing in the ancient ice. Neither the Night's Watch nor Prince Daeron Targaryen had commanded him to stay, but he sensed that he had become part of the wall's story now, bound to its fate as surely as a link in a chain. He took up a small room in one of the lesser-used towers of Castle Black, the kind of chamber that no lord or high officer would covet. A single arrow-slit window faced north, allowing him to peer out over the haunted forest and the horizon of snow beyond. He would often stare into that vast white emptiness, waiting for the slightest sign of movement. He saw ravens sometimes, black pinpricks against the pallid sky. Now and again, a gust of wind blew clouds of powdery snow into the air, making ghost shapes that disappeared as quickly as they formed. He found himself listening for the unnatural shrieks he had heard beyond the wall, the echoes of the Daedric horror he had once banished. Thus far, they did not return. But the hush that settled over the region felt tense, a calm that might presage another storm. Each day he climbed down from his tower to the library, where he painstakingly translated the scraps of old Valyrian and Daedric lore, bequeathed to him by Sir John Hollard before the man's death. He discovered notes indicating that Valyria's earliest blood mages had used living dragons as conduits for some of their great works, mixing draconic flame and Daedric essence. If the White Walkers were truly tied to ice and death, it made sense that dragons, the living embodiment of fire, might be their counterbalance. But Corlys also wondered whether there was something darker, a reason why Daedric princes had chosen cold magic for this barrier. Molag Bal was said to be the prince of domination and enslavement, lord of a realm called Cold Harbor, a place of eternal icy torment. Perhaps the ice of the wall was not purely physical in nature, but part manifestation of Cold Harbor's frost. He recalled the incantation he had used that night in the forest, how the name Molag Bal had felt like broken shards in his mouth. There was risk in summoning, or even entreating a Daedric prince for help, especially one whose domain was cruelty and bondage. Old Valyria had risked everything by forging that pact, and they had succeeded in establishing the barrier. But what was the cost? The ancient texts hinted that some portion of mortal souls was tithed to the Daedric princes in exchange for protection. Could it be that every death at the wall, every drop of blood shed by the knights watched to defend it, somehow served as a tribute? The thought gnawed at him late at night when he could not sleep. Still, he saw no immediate sign that the wards were failing again. The wall held. The ancient glyphs etched into its ice shone softly whenever he ventured to that quiet stretch where the watchers seldom patrolled. He wondered if other sections were similarly carved, hidden behind built-up snow or centuries of neglect. The enormity of the wall's length, running from the Bay of Seals in the east to the gorge in the west, suggested that it must bear many secrets. Perhaps, he thought, entire corridors of ruins existed that no living man had seen in generations. There was never enough time or manpower to investigate. The Night's Watch was spread thin, barely able to manage the known castles, let alone comb every inch of the massive glacier. He spent his days combing Castle Black's record room, rummaging through old logbooks in hopes of finding clues. Every so often, a dispatch would come in from Prince Daeron's retinue, now safely returned to King's Landing. The prince wrote guardedly, cautioning Corlys to keep certain matters quiet. Daeron also mentioned that he was gathering additional information from the Targaryen archives. In some of his letters, the prince hinted that there might still be relics, artifacts of old Valyria, languishing in the cellars of the Red Keep, or even on Dragonstone. If located, they could potentially reinforce or better control the wards from afar. But the prince offered no timetable, and Corlys sensed that the politics of the South were complicated. A Targaryen scion devoting resources to an obscure magical threat in the far north would raise eyebrows among the lords of the realm. Late one evening, as Corlys sat at a rough wooden table in the dim glow of an oil lamp, he became aware of a figure standing just outside the library door. He looked up to see Stone, the veteran watchman, peering in. Stone had aged since their harrowing trek beyond the wall. A streak of gray now ran through his hair, and he carried himself with a subtle limp. But his eyes were still keen, and Corlys respected the man's quiet competence. "Apologies," Stone said, his voice echoing in the silent library. "Didn't mean to hover. I wanted to ask if you had time for a drink. The lads are gathering in the common hall, some stews warming on the fire. You've been in here for hours." No. Corlys stared at his notes. He was hungry, he realized, but more than that, he felt the weight of isolation. Part of him longed for a simple human moment, a break from ancient ruins and cosmic terrors. He nodded, blowing out the lamp. Together, they made their way through the cold corridors of Castle Black, their footsteps echoing on the stone. The common hall was smoky and warm, alive with the muted clamor of brothers drinking ale, sharing jokes, or complaining about their latest patrols. A few glanced at Corlys, the odd scholar from the south who had arrived under strange circumstances. But they said nothing. He had become a familiar sight, his presence accepted without fanfare. He took a seat at a rough bench. Stone ladled stew into a wooden bowl and set it before him. It was thin and bland, but hot. Grateful, Corlys ate without speaking. After some time, Stone leaned in. Heard from the rangers that a few wildlings approached Eastwatch by the sea, claimed they'd found an empty village far beyond the Frostfangs. Everyone gone. No bodies, no signs of a fight, just gone. Corlys paused, stew spoon halfway to his lips. "Vanished?" Stone said. "It spooked them something fierce. They say not even footprints led away from the village, like they were plucked from the earth by some unnatural force." Corlys swallowed hard. The memory of that Daedric figure devouring souls came rushing back. "Do you think it's the same entity?" Stone shrugged, lines of worry etched into his face. "Who can say? The White Walkers have always been rumored to steal children, leaving no trace. Then again, we've never heard of an entire settlement disappearing. The rangers are at a loss." Corlys stirred the stew absently. The wards had been renewed, or so it seemed. Yet, if a Daedric presence lingered, perhaps it was shifting tactics. He had so many questions. Could that entity circumvent the wall by traveling in some intangible form? Or were there older passages, secret tunnels running beneath the ice? Many legends spoke of hidden ways. If old Valyria had helped raise the wall, perhaps they had built hidden structures too. Gateways that time forgot. He decided that night that he had to do more than merely study. He needed to seek answers beyond Castle Black, perhaps among the wildlings or even deeper in the crypts of Winterfell, rumored to be as old as the Age of Heroes. Lord Roderick Stark had once offered him quiet hospitality, though the Lord had expressed skepticism about Daedric energies. If Corlys visited again with new evidence, or troubling rumors, maybe House Stark would be compelled to dig deeper. The Starks understood ancient things, after all. They carried a legacy older than the realm itself. Early the next morning, he approached Sir Alistair Crane, the new Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. Sir Alistair was not an unkind man, but he had the discipline of a soldier and the wariness of a man who had seen too many strange omens. He narrowed his eyes at Corlys' request. "You want to leave Castle Black again?" the Lord Commander asked, leaning back in his chair. "Travel to Winterfell to consult old books and rumors of hidden catacombs. Is this truly necessary?" Corlys explained, without revealing too many specifics about the Daedric threat, that he suspected something sinister was happening beyond the wall. Wildling villages were emptying mysteriously. If any new wards were needed, or if the old wards were failing in places unknown, the archives at Winterfell might provide some clue. He spoke of the legends of the Night King, the Long Night, and how many of those stories originated from the Stark line. Sir Alistair tapped his gloved fingers on the arm of his seat. "Very well," he said at last. "I won't deny you might find answers there. I only ask that you do not stir panic. The realm can't afford a fresh wave of hysteria. I'll write a letter of passage granting you safe conduct. The roads aren't as dangerous as they were in winters past, but the north is never truly safe." Corlys felt relief wash over him. "Thank you, Lord Commander. I promise I'll do what I can to keep the Night's Watch informed." Stone appeared at Corlys' side. "I'd like permission to go with him, Commander. The roads are still treacherous, and I can help him get there in one piece." Sir Alistair shrugged. "As you will, Stone. But don't vanish forever. The Watch needs good men on the wall." That same day, they set off. The air was brisk, the wind carrying a faint taste of coming snowfall. The path south was familiar territory, though neither Corlys nor Stone took its relative safety for granted. Their party consisted of just 3 horses, one for Corlys, one for Stone, and a third pack horse, carrying minimal supplies. Corlys felt a pang leaving Castle Black behind. He had lived there long enough to develop a strange fondness for its grim walls and austere routines. But he had no time for sentimentality. If wildling villages were disappearing, they needed fresh insight. They made decent progress over the King's Road. The first night, they camped in the lee of a rocky outcropping that offered some shelter from the wind. Stone built a small fire, and Corlys rummaged through his notes by the flickering light. He found a reference that seemed innocuous at first, a mention of a hidden library beneath Winterfell, rumored to be older than the castle's official archives. He remembered reading that the Stark kings of old had sealed away certain scrolls pertaining to dark magic. They had been concerned about encouraging dangerous curiosities among men. That same evening, Stone brought out a small skin of ale to warm them. They passed it back and forth, the silence broken only by the crackle of the fire and the distant cry of a wolf. At length, Stone spoke. "You truly believe these vanishings are connected to what we fought in the forest?" Corlys gazed at the flames. "I fear so. The wards on the wall are recharged, but that might only protect the realm from a direct crossing. If the entity behind this magic can act indirectly, through illusions or through some other avenue, then the realm is still at risk. It's also possible that whatever lurks beyond the wall is not a single being, but a collection of malign forces bound to the same Daedric power." Nandel. Stone's expression tightened. "Can we fight it? With swords and arrows?" Corlys asked quietly. "I doubt it. Magic of that nature is ancient and slippery. We saw how easily that thing shrugged off steel." Even dragonglass was not tested against it, though it's said to wound White Walkers. But are these abductions the work of White Walkers, or something older? If the Daedric wards are compromised, we might be dealing with an enemy that defies everything we know. And Stone said nothing more. They let the wind speak for a time, flapping the edges of their cloaks. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by dream fragments, swirling snows, hollow-eyed faces, runes glowing in black ice. By dawn, Corlys awoke with the uneasy sense that every mile he traveled south might only remind him how helpless the Seven Kingdoms were against what loomed in the far north. They pressed on. The journey to Winterfell took them the better part of a fortnight, slowed by patches of early snow and the caution required to scout for potential banditry. Fortunately, they encountered few travelers and no notable threats. By the time they rode beneath the granite walls of the ancient Stark fortress, both men were weary but determined. Winterfell's courtyard bustled with activity. Stable hands hurried to take the horses, while guards in Stark livery nodded curt welcomes. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine from the nearby Godswood. Corlys gazed upon the castle with a new perspective, remembering his last visit with Sir John Hollard so many moons ago. Then, he had been an obscure scholar, barely tolerated. Now, he came as a man with a mission, though not exactly brandishing the authority of any lord. A steward escorted them through the central keep, explaining that Lord Roderick Stark was in residence, as was his eldest son. The steward's tone suggested that their arrival was expected, for a raven had arrived from the Lord Commander not long ago. They were brought to the great hall, where a modest fire burned in the central hearth, casting dancing shadows across the long tables. Lord Roderick sat in a carved wooden chair near the dais, warming his hands. He was a tall, sober man, hair dusted with gray, the lines on his face suggesting he had weathered many hardships. He rose to greet Corlys with a polite inclination of his head. "Corlys of the Honeywine," Lord Roderick said in that measured northern cadence. "We meet again. The Lord Commander's raven spoke of your continued studies, something about old magic and urgent questions that might concern all of us." "Many." Corlys bowed. "My lord, I thank you for receiving us. Yes, I come with troubling rumors from beyond the wall. Wildling settlements vanishing without trace. I believe we face more than White Walkers. The old pacts that maintain the wall's wards may be tested by powers we barely understand." Lord Roderick's gray eyes flicked to Stone, who nodded in silent confirmation. The Stark Lord exhaled, gesturing for them to be seated at a nearby table. Servants came with mulled wine and plates of bread and venison. Lord Roderick waved off ceremony, encouraging them to eat. As they settled in, Corlys noticed Lord Roderick's son watching from a corner of the hall, a gangly youth with sharp northern features and keen, watchful eyes. The boy seemed to be about 14, perhaps 15. Corlys met his gaze for a moment, and the boy gave a small nod of greeting before looking away. Lord Roderick spoke plainly. "I will not pretend to understand Daedric lore or old Valyrian magic. Yet I respect the Night's Watch, and I've read your earlier accounts. Perhaps you recall that I was skeptical. I remain so, to a degree. But the reports of entire settlements disappearing are new. The watchers on my northern borders, those who guard the passages through the mountains, also speak of strange sightings. A pale glow that sometimes appears at night, flickering behind the ridges. My men think it might be raiders with torches, but no one finds footprints." Stone frowned. This flickering glow, was it greenish blue, by any chance? Lord Roderick pursed his lips, clearly uncertain. "Reports vary, Doctor. Some say bluish, some say a ghostly white. In the end, all we have are frightened rumors. Still, it has unsettled my outriders." "Nedshore." Corlys leaned in. "I believe there may be a hidden library within Winterfell's crypts or lower vaults, an archive that predates the conquest. I'm hoping to find references to wards, spells, or even stories that might help me better understand how to counter these forces." Lord Roderick studied him in silence for a moment. "The Stark archives in the main library tower are at your disposal, but as for the crypts, they are a place of rest for my ancestors. not a library. Yet we do keep certain records in locked chests, those we don't share widely. I could grant you permission to inspect them, though I suspect it's mostly genealogies and old wills. Nashta. Corlys cleared his throat. He did not want to appear demanding, but time might be of the essence. Thank you, my lord. The genealogies and old wills might hide more than we think. Legends sometimes mingle with lineages, especially in the north. Lord Roderick nodded. You'll find I'm a tolerant host, Corlys. But I must warn you, if you go stirring up the darkest corners of Winterfell, you may find things better left undisturbed. My line has long safeguarded knowledge about the Long Night. We talk of the Night King, the others. But the notion of Daedric powers is alien to most of us. Try not to alarm my people. Then, sir. Corlys agreed, offering what reassurances he could. Stone, who was never one to mince words, spoke briefly of the horrors they had faced beyond the wall, reinforcing the seriousness of the quest. Though the conversation ended politely, Corlys could not help but sense tension in the air, as though the ancient stones of Winterfell itself resisted the intrusion of such forbidden knowledge. They retired to modest guest rooms. Corlys found a seat near the window, letting the night air chill his face. He gazed out at the distant silhouette of the godswood, where the carved heart tree stood, white bark glowing in the moonlight. He recalled that the old gods might be older than any faith in Westeros, possibly older even than Valyria. Would they have any dominion over Daedric influences? The thought was too large to unravel tonight, so he drifted into a restless sleep. In the morning, as arranged, a steward guided Corlys and Stone down into the depths of Winterfell's library tower. The official archives were mostly scribes' copies of royal decrees, genealogies of the major northern houses, treatises on local flora and fauna, and so forth. Corlys' heart sank as he skimmed the shelves. None of it seemed relevant to Daedric wards or references to ancient magic. Hours passed, dusty tomes and scrolls piling around him. Stone helped where he could, but quickly admitted he had little skill for reading. He contented himself with reading titles aloud, letting Corlys decide if they merited a closer look. By midday, they broke for a brief meal. Corlys rubbed his tired eyes. It was then that a soft knock on the library door interrupted them. Standing there was Lord Roderick's son, the lanky youth Corlys had noticed the previous day. He stepped in, looking slightly uncertain. "Forgive me," the boy said. "I'm Brandon Stark, my father's heir. I heard you were searching for older records. I think I might be able to show you something." "Numpersack." Stone gave Corlys a quizzical glance. Corlys rose, offering Brandon a small bow. "I'd be grateful for your guidance, my lord. What is it you have in mind?" Brandon's cheeks reddened at the formality, but he held his composure. "I was exploring the crypts not long ago, and I found a narrow passage behind a collapsed statue. My father doesn't know about it. I was going to tell him, but then I suppose I wanted to see if there was anything interesting first. I found a chest. It was locked. I didn't open it, but it looked very old." Corlys felt a spark of excitement. "That might be exactly what we need to see. May we ask you to show us?" The boy nodded eagerly. He instructed them to bring lanterns. Stone insisted on carrying a sword just in case. Corlys felt a pang of guilt, leading a boy into hidden crypts to poke at old secrets. But Brandon was no ordinary child. He was a Stark, and the North had a way of shaping its heirs into stewards of long-forgotten legends. They slipped away from the main corridors. The steward who guarded the crypt entrance gave them a curious look, but Brandon's presence dissuaded questions. The crypts of Winterfell were cold and dark, lined with the statues of ancient Stark kings and lords, each with a direwolf at their feet and a sword across their lap. The flicker of lantern light cast eerie shadows on the stony faces, giving the illusion that they watched the intruders with silent suspicion. At length, they reached a place where the crypt tunnel narrowed, half collapsed by an ancient cave-in. Brandon squeezed through a gap, beckoning Corlys and Stone to follow. They found themselves in a low, vaulted space, thick with cobwebs. The air smelled of damp stone and long-settled dust. Brandon pointed to a corner where a statue, one of a long-dead Stark presumably, had toppled. There, behind that, you can see the edge of the chest. They maneuvered the lantern to illuminate a wooden box reinforced with metal bands, corners rusted with age. Stone carefully removed debris from around it, revealing a worn lock. The chest appeared older than many of the crypt effigies, the wood darkened by centuries. Corlys knelt, testing the lock. It did not budge. I could try to force it, but I worry about damaging whatever's inside. Stone pulled a small dagger from his belt. Let me have a go, gently. He worked the blade around the lock's edge, trying to pry it open. Corlys half expected the lock to crumble to rust under minimal pressure, but it was surprisingly sturdy. After several minutes of finagling and a bit of gentle force, a faint snap sounded, and the lock popped free. Brandon craned his neck. Should we open it? My father might be angry if we do this without him. Corlys exhaled. We came this far. Let's see what it holds. If it's too dangerous, or if we need your Lord Father's help, we'll bring it to his attention afterward. Valyria. He lifted the lid, and a waft of stale air whispered out. Inside they found a bundle of old vellum scrolls tied with sinew cords, a single sealed parchment, and a small leather-bound book. The scrolls looked so fragile that Corlys hesitated to lift them. Instead, he gently held the lantern over them, examining what he could. One scroll had partially unfurled, revealing lines of cramped handwriting interspersed with swirling runes. These runes, Corlys whispered. They're not like the Daedric glyphs on the wall, but they might be some older form of writing. Perhaps a dialect of the first men, or a mixture of Old Tongue and something else. He touched the parchment gingerly. Let's bring them up. I can't decipher them here in the dark, and the crypt's damp could damage them further. Brandon nodded, a flicker of excitement in his eyes. He touched the leather-bound book, glancing at Corlys for permission. Corlys nodded. Carefully, the boy lifted it, wiping away dust. The cover was plain, with no title or emblem. The pages were thin, filled with spidery writing that looked as though it had been penned in uneven charcoal or black ink centuries ago. Stone glanced around uneasily. Let's not linger. This place. It gives me the feeling that we're trespassing on something that doesn't want to be disturbed. Corlys agreed. Even as they turned to leave, he felt a chill down his spine, as though the statues of dead Starks watched in silent judgment. He paused, looking at an especially ancient effigy whose face had eroded with time, leaving only hollow eye sockets. For a moment, he imagined it was a living skull, silently howling in rage that they had discovered something meant to stay buried. They returned to the main crypt corridor, weaving through the stone pillars until they emerged into the flickering torchlight near the entrance. The steward cast a quick, suspicious glance at the chest they carried, but said nothing. Brandon led them through a side door into a small, disused antechamber where they laid out their findings on a wide wooden table. Corlys, heart-pounding, cleared away cobwebs and bits of debris, then gingerly unrolled one of the scrolls. To his astonishment, it contained references to the Age of Heroes, with mention of the forging of pacts beyond mortal ken. A phrase caught his eye. The unseen ward, raised by ice and sealed by blood under the watch of night. Another line described prisoners from the east, whose breath froze the living stone. Could this be describing the origins of the wall, built not merely to keep out the others, but to imprison beings that came from the east, Valyrian mages, or even Daedric abominations? He felt the hair on his neck stand up. Carefully, he turned to the next scroll. This one was more cryptic, full of strange runic glyphs that he did not recognize. He saw repeated motifs. Circles within circles, eyes, and what might have been stylized chains or serpents. The script around them was in the Old Tongue, the language of the first men and the children of the forest, though it looked archaic. In one corner, he saw a faint sigil that reminded him of the swirling runes on the wall itself, yet not quite the same. This is extraordinary, Corlys breathed. If these records truly date back to the earliest Starks, they may predate the Andal's arrival by thousands of years. They might even contain direct references to the magical constructs that shaped the North. Possibly they reference how the children of the forest, if they were involved, wove their sorceries into the wall. Brandon, eyes wide, leaned closer. The children? I thought they helped Bran the Builder raise the wall. At least that's the story everyone tells. But are you saying Valyrians were here too, long before Aegon the Conqueror? Corlys shook his head. Not the Valyrians as we know them, but perhaps outcasts or precursors, those who dabbled in forces from beyond our world. The legends say old Valyria was founded by shepherds who discovered dragons lairing in the 14 flames. But what if some part of their bloodline, or the knowledge that led to their arcane mastery, came from further west, from here? Or maybe they journeyed here in secret to hide something, to seal it away. The stories conflict, but the presence of Daedric glyphs on the wall suggests a fusion of northern magic and Valyrian sorcery. That's no small feat. Nay. He hesitated, carefully untying the sealed parchment. The seal crumbled away under his touch, revealing pages of script in the common tongue, albeit an archaic variant. To his surprise, it read like a personal account. A journal entry. I am Torrhen Stark, the second of that name. I set these words down with trembling hand. My dreams have been haunted by figures of black ice and fiery wings. They tell me that the wall is not ours alone, that strangers from across the seas placed wards older and darker than men can fathom. We who call ourselves kings in the north believe we hold dominion over all that is ours. But perhaps we are mere guardians, carrying on a watch commenced before our bloodlines began. Bran the Builder's tales are only half tales, for there was another builder, known by a name that burns the tongue. He taught the means of forging ice not by mortal craft, but by the shaping of a prison. I know not whether he was man or demon, but I know we are never to speak of him, for fear of awakening the power behind his name. The children have tried to warn us. They speak of a tear in the world. I have hidden these words in the crypts so that a future Stark might read them should the wards fail and the night come again. Then Corlys read the words aloud, softly. Even stone seemed transfixed by their gravity. Brandon's hands were clenched on the edge of the table. A tear in the world, the boy repeated, voice hushed. That sounds like a breach. Corlys nodded, feeling his throat tighten. Indeed. Perhaps the children of the forest recognized a literal fracturing of reality, a place where Daedric magic seeped through. If the wall was built to seal that tear, it might explain everything. The ice is not just ice, but something drawn from Cold Harbor, shaped by mortal hands with Daedric blessing. If that's the case, then the White Walkers, these others, might only be one threat among many. If the tear widens, worse things could follow. Nothing narrow. Brandon's eyes shone with a mixture of fascination and dread. We have to tell my father. Corlys took a steadying breath. Yes. But we must do so carefully. He already knows that something is wrong beyond the wall. He needs to see these records to understand it fully. Nafsirtain. Stone lifted the leather-bound book, flipping to a random page. More notes, it seems. He squinted in the lantern light. Can't read half of it, though. The script's nearly faded. Corlys laid the other documents aside, turning his attention to the book. Each page bore notes, sketches of runes, and short paragraphs, likely entries from multiple scribes or scribes copying older entries. He deciphered a passage referencing a place called the Black Door in the Depths, which presumably lay somewhere under Winterfell or near it. The text suggested that beneath the crypts, there might be a sealed chamber used by the first men or the earliest Stark kings to commune with the children of the forest. Another page mentioned an eye, carved from obsidian, that was said to reveal hidden glyphs. The references were scattered, incomplete, but they hinted at deeper layers of secrets stored right here in Winterfell. Brandon ran a hand through his hair, the seriousness of these revelations clearly weighing on him. There's a lot in Winterfell nobody knows about, or at least rarely speaks of. My father always told me the castle was built over natural hot springs, that it was expanded over generations. But what if, at the foundation, there's something else? Mandor. Corlys set down the book gently. We should show Lord Roderick these documents as soon as possible. But I also sense time is pressing upon us. The wildlings vanish beyond the wall. Watchers see strange lights, we can't risk ignoring what this might mean. If we can't find the black door, assuming it exists, and locate that obsidian eye, it could show us more." Stone sighed. "And if it leads us into a trap, or unleashes something, we proceed with caution," Corlys replied. "But in my experience, ignoring these matters rarely ends well. The more we understand, the more likely we can avert catastrophe." They gathered the scrolls and the book, placing them carefully back in the chest for safekeeping. Brandon offered to lead them to his father's solar. Climbing the winding stairs from the crypts, they tried to formulate how best to present these findings. Lord Roderick was conferring with a group of bannermen when they arrived, but the steward announced them promptly. Corlys spotted the flicker of curiosity in the Stark Lord's face when he saw the old chest. With a polite but firm apology to his bannermen, Lord Roderick dismissed them, motioning for Corlys, Stone, and Brandon to step forward. They lost no time showing him the documents. Lord Roderick's expression darkened as he read the entries attributed to Torhen Stark. His jaw clenched when he came to the line about a tear in the world. The color seemed to drain from his face, though he maintained a stoic composure. "This is more than I expected," he said after a long silence. "So the legends we hold dear, that the wall was built by Bran the Builder with help from the children of the forest, are incomplete. There was another power, something from across the sea, possibly from old Valyria, or older still." Corlys nodded. "And it's possible they fused their own Daedric magic with whatever the children could supply. In essence, the wall is a dimensional barrier, not just a physical one. If that tier reopens fully, it might unleash terrors beyond even the others." "Now," Lord Roderick exhaled slowly. "I wish this were a jest, but clearly it is not. I've long suspected that the world is older and darker than we allow ourselves to believe. My ancestors whispered about the Long Night, the Night King, but so much is lost to myth. Now we have evidence that points to something more dire." Brandon stepped forward, eagerness fighting with apprehension in his voice. "Father, Corlys mentioned a chamber beneath the crypts, something called a black door. Could we not search for it? These documents suggest the children of the forest once communed with the Starks there." Lord Roderick gave his son a sharp look. "Brandon, you should not have ventured so far into the crypts alone." "But I found something important," the boy protested softly. "And with respect, father, this might help protect the North." The Lord sighed, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "Your bravery does you credit, but be careful." "Very well. We will explore these older levels, though I want my best men with us. We can't risk stumbling into a forgotten pit or collapsing tunnel, or stirring up something we can't handle." "Nan," Corlys spoke up. "I agree that caution is necessary, but we need to proceed soon. If we tarry, we risk giving this unknown force time to weaken the wards." Lord Roderick nodded, standing straighter as though steeling himself for the weight of centuries pressing down upon his house. "Then we make preparations. Brandon, fetch 3 of my most reliable guards, men who can hold their nerves if they see something uncanny. Corlys, gather your materials. Stone, ensure you're armed. Tonight, we descend." "Then." They dispersed, each tending to the tasks. Corlys felt a knot in his stomach, part fear and part anticipation. It had never been his ambition to delve into crypts and unravel ancient curses, yet fate seemed to have thrust him into this role. He found himself wishing Prince Daeron were here, with his Valyrian blood and personal knowledge of arcane energies. Still, perhaps it was better that they act swiftly without waiting for permission from the Iron Throne. As the sun sank, Winterfell's torches sprang to life. Corlys and Stone, accompanied by Brandon, gathered in the courtyard where Lord Roderick awaited. The 3 guards he had selected were grim, broad-shouldered men in leather armor, swords belted at their sides, carrying lanterns. The group descended into the crypts. The air felt colder than Corlys remembered, as though the presence of old secrets leached the warmth from the stones. They retraced Brandon's route, stepping carefully past rows of ancient effigies. The flickering light played tricks on the eye. More than once, Corlys thought he saw movement in the corner of his vision, only to turn and see nothing but still shadows. Eventually, they reached the collapsed statue, and the hidden space behind it. Brandon ducked in first, holding his lantern high. The rest followed, one by one, until all stood in the vaulted chamber where they had found the chest. The old trunk still rested on the table where they had left it, though now empty of the precious documents, which were safely upstairs. Lord Roderick studied the surroundings. This place predates my knowledge. I'd always believed the crypts ended well before this point. If there is another passage deeper, we should look for indications of a hidden doorway. Corlys checked the text in the old book, scanning the lines about the corridor to the black door, sealed with sorrow and memory. He glanced around, looking for a sign of an archway or a seam in the stone that might suggest a passage had been walled off. Stone ran his hands along the walls, testing for hollow spots. A few minutes passed without discovery. Then Brandon, shining his lantern along the far side, halted. "Look here," he called softly. He knelt, brushing away a layer of dust from what looked like a stone slab set into the floor. The slab bore faded carvings, spirals and a stylized face with hollow eyes, reminiscent of a weirwood tree's visage. A line of runes ringed the edge, too worn to read easily. The slab seemed to have a recessed handle at one corner. Lord Roderick stepped forward, a guard at his side. They seized the handle and pulled. It took effort, the slab resisting with a grinding moan. After a moment, it lifted, revealing a flight of stone steps descending into darkness. A chill draft blew out, making their lantern flames sputter. Brandon's breath caught. Stone cast a tense glance at Corlys. The scholar gripped his own lantern, trying to quell the unease swirling in his gut. Wordlessly, Lord Roderick nodded, and they began the descent, the guards moving ahead cautiously. The steps spiraled down, the walls slick with condensation. The deeper they went, the more the air smelled of earth and ancient decay. The flicker of lantern light revealed occasional carvings, runes scratched into the stone, half effaced by centuries of moisture. Some looked vaguely like the children's script that Corlys had seen in the scattered legends. Others looked entirely alien, swirling into shapes that hurt the eyes if one stared too long. At last, the stairs ended before an arched doorway hewn from black stone. It looked unlike the rest of Winterfell's gray granite, as though transplanted from another place. The arch was carved with the same swirling motifs found on the chest scrolls. In the center of the doorway loomed a smooth slab, presumably the black door described in the ancient text. It had no visible handle or hinges. Instead, a raised sigil marked its center. A weirwood face with empty eye sockets, ringed by faintly incised runes that seemed to spiral outward, reminiscent of the sigils on the wall. One of the guards exhaled shakily, lifting his lantern. "Gods, what is this place?" Corlys stepped closer, ignoring the flutter of dread in his chest. He ran his fingers over the carved runes, half expecting them to flare with the same eerie glow he'd seen on the wall's ice. But they stayed dark, simply cold stone beneath his touch. Lord Roderick examined the door's edges. No visible seam. How in the seven hells do we open it? Corlys recalled the passage from the old book. Only with eyes can the path be seen. Only with blood can the way be opened. He swallowed, turning to the group. "We may need an offering. This text I read mentioned an obsidian eye, but we haven't found such an artifact. Another possibility is that we need a blood sacrifice of some sort." Stone stiffened. "Blood sacrifice? I don't like the sound of that." "I'm not fond of it either," Corlys replied. "But so many of these old wards and seals rely on blood. Targaryen wards on the wall responded to Prince Daeron's blood. The old logs mentioned the children of the forest performing rites with the first men's blood to seal pacts. Let me try something simpler first." "Bellamy." He pulled a small knife from his belt, pausing to look at Lord Roderick. The Stark Lord gave a curt nod of permission. Carefully, Corlys pricked his fingertip. A bead of blood welling up. He pressed it against the carved face, smearing it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then he felt a faint tingle, as though the stone itself exhaled. The runes around the face glimmered softly, a dim red that quickly faded into darkness again. The door remained closed. Stone muttered, "Maybe that's not enough, or you're not the right bloodline." Lord Roderick took a breath, drawing the same small knife from his own belt. If any blood can open this, perhaps it's mine. Stark blood, which has guarded the north for centuries. He pricked his thumb and pressed it to the stone face. A moment passed. The runes glowed brighter this time, shimmering between red and a ghostly pale hue. The entire door vibrated with a low hum that made their lantern flames dance. Brandon stepped forward, his eyes wide. "Father." Before he could say more, the door seemed to absorb Lord Roderick's blood. The runes glowed, swirling outward like coiling serpents of light. With a soundless shudder, the black slab slid back, revealing a yawning void beyond. A rush of cold air spilled out, even more frigid than the crypt behind them. The guards exchanged uneasy glances. Stone tightened his grip on his sword. Brandon moved closer to his father, resting a hand on the older man's arm. Lord Roderick looked at Corlys, a question in his eyes. Corlys nodded, stepping carefully into the darkness, lantern held aloft. Beyond the door stretched a short corridor that opened into a low-ceilinged chamber. The walls were lined with smooth black stone blocks that glistened like obsidian. At the center rose a pedestal carved from the same material, on which lay a single object, a polished sphere the size of an apple, its surface reflecting their lantern light in shifting patterns of green and purple. It seemed to radiate a quiet, pulsing energy. Corlys' heart raced. This had to be the obsidian eye mentioned in the texts. He approached the pedestal slowly, half afraid it might spring a trap. The rest of the group spread out, their lanterns casting dancing shapes on the obsidian walls. The entire place felt oddly alive, as though every stone had eyes. Brandon whispered, "That sphere. I can feel it humming." Corlys extended a trembling hand. "Yes. It's resonating with the magic that forged this room. Let me see." He placed his palm on the sphere, expecting a jolt of pain or some surge of cold. Instead, a gentle warmth spread up his arm, followed by a swirl of images in his mind. A swirling cosmos of darkness, shapes that might have been branches or roots spanning reality, a kaleidoscope of half-glimpsed runes. He gasped, blinking hard. This is an artifact of immense power, possibly older than the wall itself, or tied to the same energies. It might allow us to see hidden things, runes or portals that are invisible to the naked eye. Stone exchanged a worried look with one of the guards. "We should be careful. We don't know if this might be cursed." "No, sir." Lord Roderick stepped around the pedestal, studying the sphere. "What if we use it near the wall? Perhaps it can reveal if the wards are weakening, or show us the source of whatever is threatening the wildlings." Corlys grimaced. "That might be exactly what we need. But I also fear that if the Daedric powers sense us meddling with this artifact, it could provoke a response. The vanishings beyond the wall might be some preliminary move, a test of our defenses. If we bring this orb too close, it could act like a beacon." Brandon's youthful eagerness burned in his eyes. "Then maybe it's time we confront this head-on. If we hide in our halls, it will only grow stronger." Corlys considered the risk. "Your father is Lord of Winterfell. The final decision is his. But if we do this, we must be prepared for a confrontation." Lord Roderick circled the chamber, noting the strange carvings etched into the walls. More swirling runes reminiscent of the children's script interwoven with something more angular, perhaps a pre-Valyrian language. The Stark Lord's shoulders were tense. "I've spent my life defending the North from mortal threats. Ironborn raids, wildling incursions, northern storms. But this is beyond mortal concerns. Still, I cannot stand idle while my people are threatened by forces older than the world we know." He paused, face set with grim resolve. "We take the sphere, then we consult again with the Night's Watch. If something stirs beyond the wall, I want us to be ready." Corlys dipped his head. "Agreed." Slowly, gently, he lifted the sphere from its cradle. The humming intensified, as though it recognized his touch. He cradled it in both hands, feeling the subtle vibration echo in his bones. The sphere was neither hot nor cold, just oddly weighty, as if containing more mass than its small size suggested. The group returned to the corridor. As they did, a soft scraping sound behind them made them all whirl. The black slab door had begun to slide shut of its own accord. One guard rushed toward it, trying to stop it, but he was too late. The door sealed with a low groan, the runes along its surface flaring once before going dark. Stone stepped forward, alarmed. "Are we trapped?" Lord Roderick touched the door. It was solid, featureless from this side. "We opened it with my blood, so perhaps it can be opened the same way from inside. But let's see." He pressed his thumb to the central face carving. A faint glow manifested, and the door slid open again, revealing the spiral stairs. One of the guards exhaled in relief. Thank the gods. They ascended, each of them occasionally peering back at the black doorway, half expecting something to lurch out. But nothing emerged, and soon they were climbing the steps toward the crypt's upper levels. When they reached the antechamber, Brandon carefully lowered the stone slab. Lord Roderick found a piece of timber that he wedged against it, ensuring they could reopen it later if needed. Emerging into the main crypt corridor was like stepping from another world back into the realm of the living. Their torches and lanterns revealed the familiar statues of stark ancestors. The group filed out into the corridor leading to the keep. Corlys clutched the obsidian sphere to his chest, half expecting it to pulse alarmingly, but it simply rested in his arms, glinting in the torchlight. Once they stood in the open air, the night sky above them, Lord Roderick told his guards to keep silent about what they had witnessed. They nodded solemnly, though the fear in their eyes was evident. Brandon looked at the sphere with an almost reverent curiosity, but a nervous line tightened his mouth. Lord Roderick turned to Corlys. "We should secure that eye or orb in a safe place. Then I'll send word to the Night's Watch. If we are to travel to the wall or ask them to come here, we need to plan carefully. The presence of Prince Darren would be valuable, but he's too far away." "Corlys agreed. "Let's keep it safe. In the meantime, I'll study it, see if I can decipher how to use it to detect anomalies or hidden glyphs." They placed the orb in a locked chest in Lord Roderick's private solar, with guards posted outside. Corlys spent much of that night recording everything that had transpired, writing notes in a precise hand by candlelight, cross-referencing the crypt scrolls. He felt certain the orb was keyed somehow to the children's magic and possibly the Daedric wards. If combined with a user's blood or incantation, it might show them the hidden fractures in the fabric of the realm. 2 days later, a raven arrived from Castle Black. Sarah Lista Crane wrote that patrols along the wall had sighted strange dancing lights in the far distance. He also reported hearing rumors of a new wildling chieftain who claimed the dead walked in the Frostfangs. The letter concluded with an urgent request for any news Corlys might have found. Corlys and Lord Roderick immediately prepared a reply, summarizing their discovery of the sphere and the crypt texts, albeit in guarded language. They invited the Lord Commander to send representatives to Winterfell to examine this artifact. As the wait began, Corlys took to daily sessions with the orb. He would sit in a quiet room, sometimes with Brandon present, though Lord Roderick was cautious about exposing his son to too much arcane influence. Corlys tried dribbling a few drops of blood on the orb's surface, reciting the incantations in the old scroll. Most times, he only felt a subdued warmth and saw fleeting images in his mind. Swirling snow, a shape like a towering figure of ice, the silhouette of a weirwood tree, its eyes black and weeping red sap. But one afternoon, while attempting a simpler approach, he simply pressed his palm against the orb and closed his eyes, letting his mind drift. Suddenly, he felt himself floating in a vast expanse of darkness lit by pinpoints of pale fire. He saw the wall as though from above, stretching across the land like a great scar of shimmering ice. Lines of faint light crisscrossed it, forming an intricate lattice of runes. Then he sensed a disturbance, like a tear or a ragged hole, far north of the Frostfangs. The lines of light around that region flickered, pulsing in agitation, as though something was testing or gnawing at them. He watched, enthralled and horrified, as twisted shapes flitted at the edge of his vision. One shape turned toward him, eyes glowing a cold, pale blue. It reached out, and Corlys felt a shock of terror, as if a claw had pierced his mind. He tore his hand away from the orb, gasping, heart hammering in his chest. Brandon, who had been quietly sitting across the table, sprang to his feet. "Are you hurt?" Corlys wiped sweat from his brow. No, just startled. I saw the wall, the wards. There's a breach forming far to the northwest. Something's attacking or weakening them." Brandon stared at the orb. "So we have to go there?" Corlys grimaced. "It's so remote that even the Night's Watch rarely patrols that area. If I'm right, something or someone is tunneling through the wards from the other side, or maybe unraveling them from within. If that's where the vanishings are tied, we have to address it before the tear widens." Nita Tyndall. Lord Roderick entered the room at that moment. Corlys relayed what he had seen, describing the location as best he could. A mountainous region north of the Frostfangs, near a glacier that fed into a frozen river. Lord Roderick's brow furrowed. "The Watchers have a name for that region. The Black Glacier. It's said to be cursed, a place even wildlings avoid. If that's the seat of this disturbance, then we must muster a strong expedition, perhaps combined with the Night's Watch." "Man." Stone, who had quietly joined them, crossed his arms. "We'll need men who aren't easily terrified. That place is rumored to be a graveyard for explorers." Corlys nodded, still shaken by the vision. "It's likely the seat of our Daedric adversary. If the wards can be physically or magically restored there, it might seal the tear again. But how do we channel the orb's power, and what sort of resistance will we face?" Lord Roderick exhaled. "We'll find out soon enough. First, we wait for the Night's Watch to respond. Then we plan. Our priority is stopping this threat before it engulfs the north." "Oh, Andy." He posted guards around the solar day and night, ensuring no one could tamper with the orb. Word spread among the servants that Lord Stark was dealing with a delicate matter. Rumors swelled. Some whispered it involved a dark prophecy. Others claimed the Lord had found an enchanted gem that could ward off White Walkers. Corlys kept his head down, continuing to refine the incantations gleaned from Torrhen Stark's scroll. The lords and ladies of Winterfell's circle gave him wary respect, uncertain whether he was a helpful scholar or a dangerous sorcerer. At last ravens arrived from Castle Black, announcing that a party of the Night's Watch, led by Stone's trusted comrade, Ranger Captain Willard, would ride to Winterfell to confer. They brought along 4 experienced rangers, men who had survived multiple excursions beyond the wall. Sarah Lister remained behind, mindful that the Watch needed leadership at the fortress in case of sudden attacks. Ranger Captain Willard was a broad man with weathered skin and a calm temperament. He greeted Stone with a rare smile, and they embraced like brothers. Then Willard turned to Corlys with a polite but guarded nod. "We read your letters, and I've spoken with Stone's account," he said over a simple meal in Winterfell's hall. "You claim there's a breach forming in the wards, far northwest beyond the Frostfangs. If that's true, we need to see it ourselves, but it's perilous country, savage even by wildling standards." Lord Roderick leaned forward. "I can muster 24 men, my best fighters and trackers. If we combine forces with your rangers, we might stand a chance. Corlys will bring the orb to locate the breach, and if possible, to seal it." Willard frowned. "I'm not sure how we seal a magical tear, but we'll do our part. We'll also want to confirm if the vanishings are tied to this area. Some of our scouts found empty campsites. Could be we'll find clues in the wilderness." Corlys cleared his throat. "We'll need a plan to address the Daedric entity that may guard this place. My only direct confrontation with it ended in a tenuous banishment. That required the wards of the wall itself to aid me. Out there in open ground, it may be more difficult. However, if the orb can amplify or replicate some of the wall's protective runes, we might stand a chance." "Sandermarsh." Willard's eyes narrowed. "Your meaning is that we rely on sorcery. That's not a comfortable notion for the Night's Watch. But I can't deny the world's grown stranger. We'll do what must be done." Stone spoke up. "We've faced unnatural terrors before. Better to be prepared for a fight that requires more than steel." Perhaps we can combine dragonglass weapons with the orb's magic. The White Walkers are said to fear obsidian. Danindsawl. Corlys nodded thoughtfully. A portion of that knowledge came from the children of the forest. The same children's magic shaped the wards, so perhaps obsidian is indeed key. The artifact we found beneath Winterfell is made of it. If we can forge runes onto arrowheads or spear points, maybe we can anchor the orb's power to them. Lord Roderick considered this. We have some dragon glass. Not much, but a supply once gifted to House Stark in the distant past. Whether it's enough, I can't say. My smiths have never worked extensively with obsidian, but they might be able to shape arrowheads and small blades. Nayman. The decision was made. Over the course of a week, the blacksmiths of Winterfell painstakingly crafted a small arsenal of obsidian-tipped weapons. Corlys oversaw the inscribing of a few rudimentary runes on them, copies of the glyphs from the scrolls. He was no master runesmith, but he did his best to replicate the shapes. The final products looked crude, yet functional. Obsidian-tipped spears, a handful of arrowheads, and small daggers. During that same period, Lord Roderick gathered volunteers. Men who had proven reliable in battle, who would not flee at the first sign of sorcery. These included some of his household guards, known for their calm in crisis. Brandon, to Corlys' surprise, pleaded with his father to be allowed to join the expedition. The request sparked a tense argument in the Lord's Solar. Corlys, Stone, and a few others stood by awkwardly while father and son clashed. "You're heir to Winterfell," Lord Roderick growled. "Your place is here, ensuring the defense of our home. This mission is too dangerous." Brandon's cheeks flushed. "And if you don't return, who defends the realm then? I'm old enough to swing a sword, and I know these crypts and archives better than any. Please, Father, let me help. I'll stay back if things get deadly, but I want to be part of this." Lord Roderick stared at his son a long moment, conflict etched in his features. At last he sighed heavily. Dots. But you stay with me, always. If I order you to withdraw, you do so without question. Understood? Nine. Yes, Father, Brandon said, trying to hide the triumph in his voice. Corlys privately worried about bringing a youth. But he also recognized that Brandon had a curious, bright mind and a measure of Stark resolve. He might prove valuable if the orb required a combination of Stark blood and other energies. Still, the risk weighed heavily. The day of departure arrived cold and gray, clouds promising snow. The assembled party counted some 30 men in total. Rangers from the Night's Watch, Stark Guardsmen, Stone, Corlys, and the young heir Brandon. They were outfitted for harsh travel, carrying tents and provisions, along with as many obsidian-tipped weapons as they could muster. Corlys carried the orb in a specially padded chest, strapped to his horse, ensuring it wouldn't be jostled too violently. As they rode north, leaving Winterfell behind, Corlys couldn't shake a sense of finality. This journey would likely determine whether the realms of men could mend the breach in the wards, or whether darkness would seep through, unleashing horrors beyond imagining. He tried to steel his mind for what lay ahead, telling himself that knowledge was the greatest weapon of all. Yet he felt fear coil in his belly, fear that even knowledge might fail against the raw might of a Daedric incursion. For days, they traveled across icy plains and winding forest trails, the cold intensifying with each league. Their breath plumed in the air, and the horses snorted clouds of vapor. At night, around flickering campfires, the men spoke in hushed tones about the mission. Some tried to laugh it off, while others simply stared into the flames, expressions grim. On the 6th day, they reached the foothills of the Frostfangs. A light snow began to fall, dusting the evergreens with silver. Ranger Captain Willard conferred with Lord Roderick and Corlys on how best to proceed. The path north of here was treacherous, a winding pass that eventually gave way to trackless tundra. Scouts went ahead, returning with reports of steep ravines and thick ice sheets. They found no sign of wildlings, which was ominous in its own way. Normally, scattered clans roamed these parts, but it was as if the land was abandoned. On the 9th day, they broke through the last vestiges of forest. The landscape stretched ahead in a stark white emptiness, broken only by jagged black rocks that jutted from the snow like the teeth of a buried giant. The wind whipped relentlessly, stinging their faces. Corlys consulted the orb intermittently, trying to gauge their proximity to the tear he had sensed. Each time he touched it, he saw fleeting visions of swirling darkness and felt the faint whisper of malevolent eyes. The further they traveled, the stronger that presence became, gnawing at the edges of his consciousness. Late on the 11th day, the wind died down. They crested a low ridge, and there, in the near distance, loomed an immense glacier of dark blue ice. It rose like a frozen wave, ridged and irregular, stained black in places as though embedded with volcanic rock or some other foreign substance. A hush fell over the company as they beheld this unnatural sight. The air felt charged, like the moment before a thunderstorm. Stone dismounted, scanning the horizon. That must be the Black Glacier. The pass is to the west, if I recall. But the ground looks treacherous. Willard motioned for one of his rangers to move ahead. The man took a few cautious steps onto the snowfield, only to slip on a hidden sheet of ice. He steadied himself, cursing softly. Lord Roderick frowned, ordering the rest to proceed with extreme caution. The men led their horses slowly, testing each step. The wind picked up, howling across the open plain, swirling eddies of snow around their feet. Corlys felt the orb pulse in its chest. He unlatched the container and carefully lifted the sphere. The hum he felt was more intense than ever. Holding it at arm's length, he noticed subtle tendrils of darkness swirling within it, like a cloud trapped inside crystal. "I sense the tears close," he said, raising his voice above the wind. "We should approach on foot." Lord Roderick agreed. Half of the men remained behind with the horses, forming a makeshift camp. The rest advanced, stepping gingerly across icy ridges. Brandon insisted on following his father, gripping an obsidian dagger with white-knuckled determination. Corlys, Stone, Willard, and a dozen others formed the vanguard. Step by step, they drew nearer to the looming glacier. As they neared its base, the black streaks in the ice became more pronounced. Some looked like minerals, but others seemed to shift beneath the surface, as though alive. The temperature felt colder here, biting through furs and armor. Corlys had the unsettling impression of crossing into a different world. They circled part of the glacier, searching for any sign of a cave or opening. Then, in a hollow where the ice curved inward, they found a gaping crevasse. Darkness yawned within, wind whistling across its rim like a mournful flute. Corlys peered inside, holding the orb near the edge. He saw a faint glow emanate from the sphere, illuminating swirling runes in the ice that would have been invisible otherwise. Lord Roderick stepped to Corlys' side, voice hushed. "Those glyphs, they look like the ones on the wall, only twisted." Corlys nodded. "It's as if something is corrupting or rewriting them. If the wards extend out here, they've been warped. The tear is likely within." Willard hoisted a lantern, its flame flickering in the gusts. "We go in." Stone nodded, jaw set. "We came this far." They roped themselves together in pairs to avoid falling into hidden fissures. Carefully, they descended into the crevasse, the ice walls towering on either side. The deeper they went, the darker it grew, until only the lanterns and orb lit their way. The black streaks in the ice glistened, forming shapes that looked disturbingly like twisted faces or clawed hands. After several minutes of tense descent, they emerged into a wide cavern beneath the glacier. The ice overhead let in some diffuse light, creating an eerie blue glow. The floor was surprisingly level, with ridges of frost that crackled underfoot. At the far end of the cavern stood what could only be described as an archway of ice, carved with runes that pulsed a sickly violet hue. Tendrils of blackness seeped around it, swirling in the cold air like living shadows. Corlys felt the orb tremble in his hands. He stepped forward, flanked by Stone and Brandon. Lord Roderick approached on his other side, obsidian spear at the ready. Willard and his rangers fanned out, weapons drawn. A hush fell over the cavern, broken only by the faint crackle of shifting ice. A whisper echoed through the space, so faint it might have been the wind. But Corlys' heart lurched. The Daedric language curled through the air like poison. He recognized it from his earlier studies, a guttural chant that invoked the name of Molai Baldada. The orb in his hands glowed, swirling with conflicting energies. Then, from the shadows near the archway, a figure emerged. It was tall, gaunt, with skin the color of frozen ash and eyes that burned a pale blue. Icy armor clung to its body, shaped into grotesque spikes. Ace was contorted, half human, half nightmare. When it spoke, its voice carried 1,000 echoes, as though an entire choir of damned souls screamed through its throat. "Fools," it hissed, the word distorting with an otherworldly timbre. "You think to mend what was never meant to be sealed. The tear belongs to us, belongs to the princes of the void. Now?" Willard raised his sword, rallying his men. A couple of them let fly arrows tipped with obsidian. One arrow clattered off the ice floor, missing. Another struck the figure's shoulder, shattering as if striking iron. The being snarled and raised a hand, wreathed in swirling frost. A burst of ice shards erupted, slamming into 2 rangers and hurling them backward. They landed hard, sliding across the slick floor. Lord Roderick bellowed a war cry, brandishing his spear. Corlys clung to the orb, mind racing. He needed time to enact a binding or cleansing rite. Stone charged forward, swinging his obsidian-tipped axe, but the creature was unnaturally fast. It ducked aside, moving in a blur, then swept a clawed hand across Stone's chest. Sparks of frost flew. Stone reeled, nearly losing his footing, but the axe cut a shallow gash along the creature's arm. It shrieked, a sound that cracked the ice beneath their feet. Corlys steadied himself, taking a deep breath. He recalled the incantations from Torhan Stark's scroll, combined with the Daedric phrases. Perhaps he could invert the corruption. Clutching the orb, he began to chant in a low voice, weaving Old Valyrian with the children's runes. He traced a symbol in the air with one hand, feeling the orb pulse in response. The swirling blackness inside it began to lighten, shifting to a pale glow. The Daedric creature sensed the magic. It roared, surging toward Corlys. Brandon leaped between them, dagger raised, but the being batted the blade aside effortlessly. Before it could strike the boy, Lord Roderick slammed his spear into its flank, staggering it. Another pair of guards closed in, their swords swinging. The fight was chaotic, echoing in the cavern as steel clashed with enchanted ice. Corlys continued chanting, blood pounding in his ears. He felt the orb's energy surge, connecting him to the runes etched in the ice around them. A vision flared in his mind, a shimmering lattice of glyphs that formed the wards. Each glyph glowed either clean blue or sickly violet. He focused on severing the violet lines, rewriting them with the patterns from the old scroll. The cavern trembled. Chunks of ice rained from the ceiling as the magic tore through the space. The Daedric creature howled, its eyes blazing. It flung out another wave of frost, sweeping several men off their feet. Stone slid across the ice, barely managing to keep his axe. One of the rangers was pinned against a wall by a jagged spear of ice. Lord Roderick pressed the attack, ignoring a gash on his arm that stained the ice with his blood. He feinted left, then drove his spear into the creature's abdomen. The obsidian tips sank in, steam erupting from the wound. The being let out an agonized shriek, half falling to one knee. Corlys seized the moment. He raised the orb high, chanting louder. The violet lines in his mind's eye began to fray. He felt the presence of something behind the creature, a greater power, straining to push through. He poured every ounce of will into sealing that gap. The orb glowed fiercely, now a brilliant white. In response, the archway behind the creature flickered, the swirling shadows receding. The black lines in the ice receded as well, replaced by crackling threads of bright blue. The entire glacier groaned, shifting with the force of the magical realignment. With a final, desperate cry, the Daedric creature lunged at Corlys. Stone, battered but unyielding, intercepted it, burying his axe in the creature's side. Lord Roderick twisted his spear deeper. The monster's body froze momentarily, as though turning to brittle ice from within. Then it shattered, fragments skidding across the floor in a spray of frost. A moaning hiss reverberated through the cavern, like the last echo of an unearthly wind, and then all was still except for the labored breathing of the men. Corlys sank to his knees, clutching the orb. Its brilliance dimmed, returning to a subtle glow. Around him, the runes in the ice walls faded, leaving only the natural hue of the glacier. The archway still stood, but the swirling shadows were gone, replaced by a crystalline surface that reflected their lantern light. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Stone muttered, "7 hells. Did we do it?" Corlys coughed, regaining his composure. "I think we closed the breach, at least for now. The wards. I realigned them with the orb's help. That thing, perhaps a Daedric servitor, was binding them to open the tier." "Did not." Willard approached slowly, surveying the damage. 2 of his men lay injured, but alive. Another guard had a broken arm. Lord Roderick's face was drawn with pain, blood trickling down his arm. But despite the wounds, they were victorious. Brandon stood close to his father, eyes wide with shock and relief. Lord Roderick grimaced as he pressed a hand to his bleeding arm. "The tier is sealed. What of the wards across the rest of the wall?" Corlys caught his breath. "I suspect they're stronger now that this corruption is removed, but we must remain vigilant. Daedric forces could attempt to unravel them elsewhere." Stone collapsed against a chunk of ice, exhaling heavily. "Then we'll keep watch. Another day, another monstrous horror. At least we're alive." The men gathered themselves, tending to the injured. Corlys gently placed the orb back into its chest, feeling it still radiating a soft warmth. He sensed that the immediate crisis was resolved, though the cosmic threat of the Daedric princes would never truly vanish. They were eternal beings, after all, patient and cunning. But at least, for this generation, the tier was closed. They slowly made their way out of the cavern, climbing back up the crevasse with utmost caution. The wind howled overhead. When they finally emerged onto the frozen plain, the black streaks in the glacier's surface seemed to have dulled in color, less menacing than before. The rest of their company, waiting anxiously at the makeshift camp, greeted them with cheers of relief mixed with awe at the battered state of the returning party. Lord Roderick ordered an immediate return south, for the wounded needed better care. Ranger Captain Willard agreed to dispatch messages to Castle Black once they were within reach of a ravenry. Corlys, exhausted yet buoyed by relief, rode in silence, holding the orb carefully. Brandon lingered near him, occasionally casting glances at the mysterious sphere that had helped them avert calamity. There was sorrow for the men who had been hurt, but also gratitude that so many had survived an encounter with a Daedric horror. It took them nearly 2 weeks to return to Winterfell. The journey seemed shorter with the urgent tension lifted, but also more grueling as the wounded needed careful handling. Upon their arrival, the gates opened to let them in. Servants rushed to assist. Maesters treated cuts and bruises and tended the broken limbs. The battered men took comfort in warm beds, grateful to be behind stout walls once again. That night, in the Great Hall, Lord Roderick held a modest feast to honor those who had braved the Black Glacier. He insisted on personally thanking each man, Night's Watch and Stark retainer alike. Brandon sat at his father's side, looking a bit pale but proud, as though he had aged years in a matter of weeks. Corlys found he could not fully join in the merriment. He slipped away from the hall after a few token toasts. The biting cold of the courtyard felt more honest. He stood there, gazing at the sky sprinkled with stars. Somewhere, far beyond that horizon, Daedric powers watched and waited. For now, the realm was safe. The wards would hold. The North had proven it could still muster courage against the darkness. Stone came up beside him, arms folded. Not celebrating with the rest. Corlys shook his head. "I suppose I'm relieved, but I can't quite relax. There's more out there. We sealed one tear, but the knowledge of how to unravel the wards exists. The Daedra might try another approach, and the White Walkers, they remain a threat. We don't even know how they tie into all. They tie in." Stone nodded, his breath steaming in the crisp air. "True enough, but we did what we came to do. Sometimes that has to be enough for now." Corlys managed a small smile. "You're right. One crisis at a time." Necessity. They stood together in companionable silence. The wind murmured over the battlements. Inside, laughter and clinking cups reverberated. A small beacon of hope in a harsh land. Corlys closed his eyes briefly, remembering the swirl of runes in his vision, how they had aligned once more into a cohesive tapestry. Brandon's youthful bravery, Lord Roderick's unwavering commitment, the battered watchman's courage. They were all threads in that tapestry, forging a bulwark against ancient terror. And so, in the hush of Winterfell's courtyard, Corlys allowed himself a rare moment of calm. The wall still stood, bound by mortal valor, and the echo of Daedric might subverted for the realm's protection. For now at least the north would sleep without the nightmare clawing at its edges. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new intrigues. But as dawn crept over the horizon, Corlys felt a fragile but unmistakable sense of triumph. They had faced the unthinkable and prevailed. Yet in the quiet recesses of his heart, he could not forget the words of Torrhen Stark's scroll. We are never to speak of him, for fear of awakening the power behind his name. Whatever name that was, whatever ancient entity had taught the forging of this Daedric-laced wall, still lurked in the edges of the world. Men might forget, centuries might pass, but secrets older than time itself did not die. They merely waited, patient as ice in the darkest winter, for that one moment of mortal folly to break the seal once more. And Corlys knew he would remain vigilant, a scholar forever shaped by the revelation of what lay behind the wall's shimmering facade. He would keep watch so long as life endured, trusting that, when the hour came again, brave souls would rise to defend the light. For that, ultimately, was the fragile bargain, mortal courage against immortal threats, a tapestry woven from fleeting lives to cage the hungry void. And for a while longer, at least, that cage would hold.